I never thought I'd be standing in my doorway at midnight, staring into Sophia's tearful eyes as she whispered she loved me. My name's Jake. I'm 32. A carpenter living just outside Chicago in a quiet suburb where the biggest disruption is a rogue squirrel messing with someone's garden. I've lived on Maple Street for 5 years now. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave, dogs bark at the same squirrels every morning, and the mailman knows everyone by name. Until 20 minutes ago, I thought I knew what my life looked like. Then there was that knock. It was soft, almost uncertain, but sharp enough to cut through the silence of my living room. I'd been dozing off on the couch, a rerun playing on mute, an empty glass of iced tea sweating on the coffee table. When I opened the door, she was standing there. Sophia, my neighbor from 3 houses down. Her silver hair was pulled back loosely, her green eyes wet but steady, and her hands were trembling. She didn't say hi or offer some polite explanation. She just looked at me like she'd been holding something in for far too long. "I'm sorry," she said first. "I shouldn't have come like this, Jake. But let me say it." Her voice was uneven, breath-hitching. "I'm in love with you, Jake. I've been trying not to be because I thought maybe you just see me as this lonely older woman who bakes too much and talks about robins and herbs like it's still 1987 TD7. She let out a laugh that cracked halfway through. I stood there completely still. The weight of what she just said hadn't even begun to settle in. That's when the story stopped being about a regular night and started becoming something else. But to explain how we got to this moment, I need to go back. Started simple enough, like most things do. I moved into this neighborhood after my last relationship ended in a slow, quiet breakup. The kind where no one yells, but everything important goes unsaid for too long. Maple Street felt like a place I could breathe again. Friendly folks, front porches, yards where kids still played, and neighbors still offered baked goods without a catch. Sophia was one of the first people I met. I was sweeping off my porch one afternoon when she showed up holding a plate wrapped in foil. "I made banana bread," she said, smiling. "I always bake too much and hate wasting things." I remember thinking she had the kind of presence that made you slow down. Her voice was calm, like she wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. She looked around 60, maybe a little less. Silver hair that shimmered in the sun, those light green eyes, and a way of standing still that somehow felt warm. We made small talk, her garden, my truck, the neighborhood squirrels. She mentioned she'd lost her husband 3 years back in a tone that didn't ask for sympathy, but made you feel it anyway. From that day on, we'd see each other here and there. At first, it was casual smiles, waves, short chats while taking the trash out or bringing in groceries. Then came the longer talks. I'd be fixing something in the yard and she'd walk over with iced tea. She always made it just the way I liked. Strong, not too sweet. We talked about simple things, birds, books, weather. I never felt the need to impress her, and she never tried to be anything she wasn't. I liked that. What caught me off guard was how much I started to look forward to those little moments. Her laughter wasn't loud, but it lingered. She listened like she was really there, not half scrolling through her phone like most people. And she remembered things like how I hated cinnamon or how I always fixed things before I made breakfast. I guess I started seeing her before I realized I was seeing her. She had this quiet way of making the world feel steadier. And I didn't even know how much that meant to me until tonight when she stood in my doorway, breaking open the silence we'd both been holding on to. Sophia was the kind of woman who didn't need to announce herself. She just was the kind of presence that made you sit back a little and listen better. And not because she demanded it, but because you wanted to. I remember the first time I really looked at her. It wasn't during one of our casual chats or when she brought over banana bread. It was a warm morning in late spring. I was on my porch drinking coffee, and she was kneeling in her garden wearing these soft gray pants and a blue button-up shirt. Her sleeves rolled, a straw hat shielding her face. There was something about how gentle she was with the plants, like she respected them in a way I'd never thought about. When she stood to stretch, her silver hair caught the light, and I swear for a moment it shimmered like it had a story of its own. I never paid much attention to things like that before, but she made stillness feel valuable. She made ordinary feel like something worth noticing. We started talking more after that. It would start with something small like the robins nesting under my gutter or how my hydrangeas were struggling. Sophia always had a suggestion. A little crushed eggshell helps, she'd say. Or try moving them to where the afternoon sun doesn't hit so hard. One morning, she handed me a small jar with a handwritten label. Gardener's tea for struggling roots in tired mornings. I didn't even know what was in it, but I made a cup anyway. She had this way of making you feel seen without making it a big deal. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush. When you talked to Sophia, she actually listened. And I didn't realize how rare that was until I started looking forward to it more than I'd admit. There was this moment. I think it was late June. We were leaning over the fence, sipping drinks. I told her about a job I'd just finished downtown. This tricky piece of cabinetry I'd been wrestling with for days. She listened like it mattered. Not just the job part, but how I talked about it. Then she smiled and said, "You talk about would like most people talk about someone they're in love with." I didn't know what to say, so I laughed and said, "Well, would doesn't argue back." She gave me this knowing grin and then said softly, "Not if you listen to it." That stayed with me probably longer than it should have. It was around then I started noticing things I hadn't before. How she'd always have her back door open when I was working outside. How she'd pause mid-task to glance in my direction. Nothing obvious, just subtle moments that felt like something unsaid floating between us. My last relationship had ended a year before I moved here. It was one of those situations where you keep trying to fix something that doesn't want to be fixed. There was love once, I think, but it faded into quiet distance. Toward the end, I felt more alone in that relationship than I ever did living by myself. But with Sophia, it was different. There was no performance, no pretending to be more interesting or more put together. I could be quiet with her and she didn't rush to fill the silence. I remember one morning I caught myself watching her from the window. She was reading on her porch, one leg tucked under her, mug in hand, and I thought I want to sit there with her, not talk, not flirt, just be there. The realization startled me. It wasn't some crush built on convenience. It wasn't about loneliness or timing. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite name yet. I started waking up earlier, hoping I'd catch her outside. I'd take the long way around the block just to pass her house. I told myself it was nothing, just neighborly, just friendship. But the truth was, I'd stopped seeing Sophia as just the woman with the banana bread. She had become the person I thought about while I worked, the voice I wanted to hear when something good or bad happened. And the way she looked at me sometimes, I wondered if she felt it too. I didn't know what to do with those feelings. There were obvious reasons to keep them buried. The age gap, the neighbor factor, the quiet what would people say. Worries that creep in when things don't fit into a neat little box. But that didn't stop the slow build of something neither of us had spoken out loud. It was there in the way we lingered after our talks. In the way her hand would graze mine over the fence. In the way my mornings didn't feel quite right unless I'd seen her smile. Something was happening quietly, gently, like a root finding its way through stone. And I think both of us were beginning to feel it. It was a Saturday morning when it happened. The sound that made my heart jump before I even had shoes on. A loud crash followed by a thud. Sharp and unexpected, like something had gone completely wrong. And it came from Sophia's house. I was out of my place in seconds, barely remembering to lock my door. Her kitchen window was open, and the moment I stepped onto her porch, I heard her voice call faintly, "I'm okay." But I didn't hesitate. I knocked once and then pushed the door open, calling her name. She was on the floor, not hurt thankfully, but sitting awkwardly among broken glass, dark red jam, and a small ceramic jar split in two like it had been dropped with force. She looked up at me, slightly embarrassed, but smiling anyway. "Strawberry and thyme," she said. "That was supposed to be a gift." I crouched beside her, careful not to kneel in the mess. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she said, slipped trying to reach the top shelf. That's what I get for being stubborn. I helped her up and led her to one of the kitchen chairs. Her hands were sticky and faintly trembling. She waved me off when I asked if she needed ice or to sit down longer. "Just help me clean it before it dries," she said, her voice light. But I could tell something about today was different. We worked side by side, gathering shards of the jar and dabbing up the deep red jam with damp paper towels. The whole kitchen smelled like strawberries and herbs, Sweet, floral, familiar. It reminded me of her. We didn't talk much at first, just moved around each other like we'd done this 100 times. But it was effortless. The way our hands passed each other. The way she anticipated my next step before I even thought about it. When the floor was clear and the counter wiped down, she poured us both some coffee and we sat at the small table by the window. The sunlight poured in, catching the bits of jam still lingering in the grout. I made that jar with my husband, she said quietly. Years ago, before we really knew what we were doing, we'd planted way too many strawberries that year. The time was his idea. Her hands wrapped around the mug. It's funny, she continued. You think you made peace with something, with someone being gone. But then one little thing, a smell, a sound, a broken jar, and suddenly it's all back. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and listened. Sophia stared out the window. He's been gone 3 years now. Cancer, fast and mean. One day we were making plans for spring. The next, I was learning how to reset the sprinkler system because he'd always done it. She paused. The things I miss most are the smallest. Like having someone to tell things to, like when I see the first robin in the yard or when the tomatoes finally ripen and I get excited and have no one to turn to and say, "Look, it's silly." "It's not silly," I said, and I meant it. She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes soft, tired, but filled with something familiar. A quiet loneliness I knew too well. "Do you ever feel that?" she asked. "Like you're fine on the surface, but under that there's this hollow space you try not to notice too often." I nodded all the time. Sophia didn't respond, just gave the smallest smile, the kind you give when someone understands without needing to explain. We sat there for a while, just two people surrounded by the faint smell of strawberries and memories. That afternoon changed something between us. We didn't talk about it later. Didn't bring up the broken jar or her husband or the quiet grief that sat with us like a third guest. But after that, I noticed more. How she'd linger on her porch when she saw me outside. How I found myself inventing excuses to check on her garden. We didn't cross any lines, not yet. But the emotional thread that tied us together was tightening. And maybe for the first time in a long time, neither of us felt entirely alone. After the jam jar incident, something changed. Not in an obvious dramatic way, but in those subtle shifts that only make sense when you're looking back. We didn't talk about that morning again. We didn't have to, but from that day forward, Sophia and I moved a little closer in ways we couldn't quite name. Our conversations grew longer, our silences more comfortable. There were days I'd stop by just to drop off something from the hardware store. Some extra mulch, a new bird feeder, a pack of solar lights for her garden. I'd pretend I had extras, but we both knew I picked them out with her in mind. Sometimes she'd invite me in and we'd share lunch. Her meals were always simple. Soup, homemade bread, the kind of things that made you slow down when you ate. She had this way of making the ordinary feel intentional. We talked about everything and nothing. Old movies, music from before I was born, books she kept meaning to read again. I'd tell her about my work, the clients who wanted walnut instead of maple, the ridiculous requests people made for modern rustic kitchens. She laughed easily, like she found joy in things most people overlooked. And slowly, I found myself reaching for her opinion more than anyone else's. I liked how she thought about things, how she never rushed to speak. But when she did, it mattered. I think I started falling for her in those quiet spaces between words. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it was just admiration, that I respected her, that I enjoyed her company because she was kind and interesting, not because I felt anything deeper. But then there were the small gestures that betrayed me, like the way I'd take longer fixing something in her house just to be around her a bit more. Or how my eyes would find her when we were talking and linger a little too long on the curve of her smile. Or the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. How I'd catch myself smiling at nothing after I left her place. Like some teenager who didn't know better. The age difference crept in like a shadow I couldn't shake. It hovered over every thought I had about her. Every feeling. I didn't know if she saw me the same way or if I was just this kind neighbor she enjoyed talking to. Part of me was afraid to find out. There were moments, though, when the space between us felt different, like something could happen if only one of us would say it out loud. One afternoon, I was helping her repair a section of her back deck. She sat nearby with iced tea, watching me work, occasionally handing me screws or wiping sawdust off my forearm. I felt her eyes on me, not in a passing glance kind of way, but something closer, softer. When I looked up, she didn't look away. "You're really good at this," she said. "It's just wood and nails." "No," she said. "It's more than that. You make things feel solid." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled and went back to hammering, my heart louder than the tool in my hand. Later that evening, we sat on the finished deck, the sun setting behind the maple trees. Neither of us said much. She poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one. We talked about the movie Casablanca, how much emotion was packed into the smallest glances, the lines left unsaid. "People don't make movies like that anymore," she said. "Everything now is loud, obvious, but back then you had to feel it between the words." I looked at her then, the way the light hit her face, how relaxed she seemed. "You like things that are unspoken," I said. She nodded slowly. "Sometimes the things we don't say the most." I wanted to tell her everything in that moment, that I thought about her more than I should, that I caught myself daydreaming about what it would be like to cook together in the evenings, to fall asleep next to someone like her. Steady, wise, quietly funny. But I didn't. The fear won out. The fear of misunderstanding, of losing what we already had. So I held it in. She looked at me like she might have known, like she was waiting for me to be brave. But all I could do was sip my wine and let the silence stretch between us, full of all the things neither of us was quite ready to say. By the time winter settled in, the rhythm between Sophia and me had become its own quiet routine. She'd check in on me if it snowed overnight, asking if I needed help clearing the drive, knowing full well I'd already done it before sunrise. I'd bring over salt or firewood for her front steps under the excuse of just passing by. Neither of us mentioned how often we saw each other. It had just become the way things were. One chilly evening in December, I showed up at her place with a stack of firewood. She opened the door wrapped in a thick cardigan, steamed from her kettle curling into the cold air behind her. "You're going to spoil me," she said with a half smile, stepping aside to let me in. I shrugged, just helping a friend. She paused. "Is that what we are?" That question hung between us like mist you couldn't brush away. I set the wood down by the fireplace and turned toward her. "I thought so. Aren't we?" Sophia looked at me like she was trying to decide if she should speak or stay safe in silence. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if we're something else. And it scares me a little." I didn't answer. Couldn't. Not right away. So, I just stood there, coat half unzipped, heart beating like I was back in high school. She smiled like she was trying to soften the moment. "Don't worry. I'm not asking for anything. I haven't felt this alive in years, Jake. Not since before Robert got sick." Her voice cracked a little when she said his name. "It's not that I'm trying to replace him. It's just for the longest time I thought that part of me was gone. The part that could want again, laugh again, sit across from someone and feel like I matter." "You do matter," I said. The words left my mouth before I even thought about them. And they weren't casual. They were full of everything I'd been holding back for months. She stepped closer, arms crossed, more for comfort than warmth. "You make me feel like myself again. Not someone's widow, not the quiet woman down the street, just Sophia." I didn't know how to explain what she made me feel, but I knew this. No one in years had made me feel as grounded, as centered, as seen as she had. "I think about you all the time," I admitted, even when I try not to. She smiled a little sad, a little hopeful. "Then we're both in trouble." We didn't kiss. Not yet. But the tension between us had shifted. The edges of our friendship had softened, blurred, turned into something more. From that night on, our days took on a new weight. Every small touch, every pause in a conversation, every shared glance felt loaded with meaning. We never talked about what we were, but we stopped pretending it was just friendship. One night, the furnace in her place went out. She called to me, flustered and cold. I grabbed tools and headed over. By the time I got it working again, it was almost midnight. "Stay," she said, "just until the heat kicks in." She handed me a blanket and sat next to me on the couch. Both of us bundled up drinking tea. I remember her looking at me for a long time before she said, "I've been lonely, Jake. Not desperate, just human." There's a difference, so I nodded. I get it. She reached over and took my hand. It wasn't dramatic or flirtatious. It was simple. A hand reaching for comfort, for truth. She looked at our fingers laced together. I'm afraid of what this could mean, of what people might say, of what I might lose if I let this happen. I squeezed her hand. I'm afraid too, but being near you feels more right than anything has in a long time. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat in silence while the furnace rattled gently back to life. That night didn't end in anything explosive. No dramatic confessions or big moves, just two people holding on to each other, finally allowing the possibility of us to unfold in the quiet. After that night on her couch, everything between Sophia and me shifted, but gently like snow starting to fall before you even notice it's begun. There was no dramatic announcement, no titles. No one said, "So, are we dating now?" We just started being together more intentionally, more openly. It began with small changes. I'd show up at her place with groceries and we'd cook dinner together instead of just talking over tea. She'd leave a folded note in my mailbox that said, "Come by tonight, lasagna and old jazz records." I'd read it at the end of a long workday and feel something I hadn't in a month time. Lightness. One evening in late January we went out to dinner. For real dinner. White tablecloths, candles, a waiter in a vest. I picked the place because I'd driven past it a dozen times and thought, if I ever go somewhere nice with someone I care about, this would be it. She wore a blue dress that made me stop in my tracks the moment she opened her door. Her silver hair was down for once, soft and natural. When she saw my face, she smiled a little shyly. "You look," I started but stopped myself. "What?" I shrugged. "I'm trying to figure out how I got so lucky." Sophia laughed quietly. "You're sweet, but you don't have to say things just to flatter me." "I'm not saying it to flatter you. I'm saying it because it's true." She looked at me for a moment like she didn't know what to do with that. And then she touched my arm lightly. "Let's go before I start blushing." Dinner was slow, unhurried. We talked about everything. Books, our worst jobs, childhood memories. She told me about a trip to Italy she took in her 30s and how she always wanted to go back. I told her about my old dog, Rex, who used to ride in the back of my truck and bark at every passing motorcycle like it had personally offended him. At one point, the couple at the next table looked at us with something between curiosity and surprise. Maybe they were trying to figure out what we were to each other. Maybe they were wondering about the age difference, but Sophia didn't flinch. Still, when we walked back to the truck, she was quiet. I asked if everything was okay. She hesitated. Sometimes I feel like people are watching us, judging. I looked at her. They might be, but so what? I'm not embarrassed. She sighed. It's not you I worry about. It's how the world sees women like me with younger men. There's always some assumption that I'm desperate or trying to relive something I've lost. I shook my head. Anyone who really saw you would never think that. Sophia smiled. You always know the right thing to sow. I don't, I said. I just mean it. Back at her place, we stood in the kitchen, neither of us moving to say goodbye. She was leaning against the counter, her heels kicked off, barefoot now, her dress still perfect, her presence calm. I stepped closer, unsure if it was the right moment, but she didn't move away. And then, without a word, we kissed. It wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was quiet, certain. Her hand resting on my chest, my fingers brushing the side of her face. I don't know how long we stood like that, but when we finally pulled back, everything felt settled. That kiss changed things. Not because it was bold, but because it was real, like we'd finally stopped circling around something that had been there all along. After that, we eased into a rhythm. I'd worked during the day, and most evenings I'd find myself at Sophia's. We cooked, watched old films, played records. Sometimes we sat in silence, reading or just being near each other. It didn't feel like some whirlwind affair. Felt like home. She started leaving a toothbrush for me in the bathroom. I brought over extra flannel shirts I left hanging in her hallway closet. We weren't rushing anything, but we weren't avoiding it either. We kept it between us, not because we were ashamed, but because it felt like something too new and fragile to explain to others. And in that quiet space between fear and hope, between judgment and truth, we found something neither of us had expected: a second chance. For her, it was life after loss. For me, it was love without pretense. And for both of us, it felt like the start of something worth holding on to. Things were easy until they weren't. We'd made it through the quiet early days of winter, past the holidays, and into that stretch of February where everything feels still and gray. Sophia and I had settled into a rhythm. It wasn't just dinners and shared routines anymore. It was the little things: her brushing her fingers through my hair while I read on the couch, me fixing the loose drawer in her bathroom without being asked. Felt good, real. But love, even the kind that sneaks up on you, doesn't stay untouched forever. Started with a phone call. I was in her kitchen making tea when her cell lit up on the counter. She glanced at it, then turned the burner down. "It's my daughter," she said, and her voice already had that shift in it, tight, guarded. I stepped out to give her space, but I still heard pieces, long pauses, low tones, her saying things like, "I know how it sounds and it's not a phase." Then silence. When I came back in, she looked at me with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's not thrilled," Sophia said, sitting down at the table. "I didn't push, just waited. She doesn't understand. She thinks I'm going through something, that I'm confused, that this," she gestured between us, "is reckless." "That's not fair," I said. She sighed. "She's 28. She's protective and maybe a little embarrassed. I guess in her head, mothers don't date men her age." I leaned on the counter, unsure what to say. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you make me feel more like myself than I have in years. That I care about you. That I'm not asking her for permission." It sounded brave, but her hands were shaking slightly, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. That week, things felt different. Not distant exactly, but cautious. Sophia was quieter. She smiled less. And though we still saw each other, there was a heaviness I couldn't ignore. It all came to a head when I invited her to a small party my coworker was hosting. Nothing big, just drinks, music, people from the shop. Sophia hesitated. "Are you sure you want me there?" "Of course," I said. "Why wouldn't I? I don't know. I don't want to be the one everyone whispers about. The woman who looks out of place." I reached for her hand. "Sophia, if anyone says anything, that's their problem, not ours." She smiled, but it was tired. "You're not the one being judged." That night, she didn't come. Said she wasn't feeling well. I went alone, and while I tried to enjoy myself, I spent most of the evening glancing at the door, hoping she might still show up. When I got back to her place afterward, the porch light was off. No text, no call. 3 days passed, silence. I told myself to give her space, that she needed time to sort through her thoughts, not pressure. But by day 4, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to her house, heart pounding. She answered in her robe, surprised but not annoyed, just worn out. "I'm sorry," she said before I could even speak. "I've been in my head." I stepped inside. "You could have said something, Jake." I didn't know what to say. Part of me thought maybe you'd be better off without the drama, without the baggage. "Sophia," I started, but she cut me off. "I lost myself for a long time after Robert died. And just when I start to feel like I'm coming back, I let fear pull me under again. I thought maybe you'd see it, too. That I'm too much, too complicated." I stepped closer, pulled a small bouquet from behind my back. Simple wildflowers, nothing fancy. Her eyes softened when she saw them. "I don't care how complicated it is," I said. "Care about you. And if loving you means sorting through a little mess, I'm in." Her eyes filled slowly, not in a dramatic way, just quietly, like someone who hadn't let herself feel too much for too long. "I love you," I said, because the moment needed truth more than anything else. She stepped forward, arms wrapping around me like an answer she'd been holding in. "I love you, too," she whispered into my chest, even when I tried not to. And just like that, the air cleared. Not all at once, but enough. Love, I was learning, wasn't about getting everything right. It was about staying when it got hard and choosing the person. Even when the world had opinions, we chose each other that night. Finally, out loud. Spring came slowly that year, but it felt different, lighter. The thaw wasn't just in the air or the ground. It was in us. Sophia started smiling more again. The kind of smile that reached her eyes and stayed there. She joined a local garden club, started walking in the mornings with a neighbor named Carol, even signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I watched her come back to life day by day. And us, we weren't hiding anymore. We went out together to brunch, to hardware stores, to the local art fair where she bought me a handmade coffee mug and joked it was for the mornings you stay over. People still looked sometimes, not in a cruel way, just with curiosity. But Sophia stopped shrinking beneath it. I stopped noticing altogether. We started talking about the future, not as a fantasy, but as a plan, what it would look like to build something together. A shared home with space for her garden and my tools. A place that belonged to us. We spent Saturdays driving around looking at houses not too far from Maple Street. But something with more light, more yard. She dreamed out loud about a big kitchen with a window over the sink. I dreamed about a shed in the back where I could finally set up a proper workshop. It wasn't a race. We were moving with intention, but we were moving. Then one night around midnight, Sophia showed up at my door, tears in her eyes. I pulled her in without a word. "It's my daughter," she said after a long silence, sitting on the edge of my couch. She said, "If I don't end this, she's done." She said I've embarrassed her, that I'm ruining our family's reputation. I sat next to her, trying not to let my anger show. "Did she say that to hurt you?" "She said it because she believes it." Sophia looked down at her hands. "And the worst part, a tiny voice in me wonders if she's right. If I'm being selfish, if I'm dragging you into something that'll only cause problems." I turned toward her, waited until she looked me in the eye. "Do I look like someone who's settling?" "No," she whispered. "I'm here because I want to be. Because I've had years of doing what was expected, of keeping things normal, and none of that ever felt like this. You're not dragging me anywhere. I'm walking into this with you." She didn't speak for a long time, just held on to my hand like she needed to memorize it. The next day, Sophia called her daughter. I wasn't there, but later she told me she'd cried, said everything she needed to say, and then let go of the need to be understood. "She might come around," Sophia said, "or she might not. But I can't live my life waiting for permission to be happy." It was the bravest thing I'd ever seen her do. 6 months later, we moved into our new house. It had a wide front porch, a deep backyard, and just enough room for everything we both brought with us. Books, tools, fears, and hope. Her daughter didn't come to visit. Not yet. But she sent a card with a simple message. "I'm thinking about you." It was enough for Sophia to cry and smile. We spent the summer building a life, planting herbs, drinking coffee in the mornings, painting the hallway together, and arguing over whether warm sand was beige or cream. We weren't trying to prove anything anymore. We were just living, loving, slowly building something solid. And one evening over a plate of pasta and 2 glasses of wine, Sophia said, "You know what I've been thinking about?" "What's that?" "Italy. I want to go back with you. I want to show you where I fell in love with tomatoes and slow dinners, and I want to watch you see Rome for the first time." I laughed. "You're serious?" She nodded. "Dead serious." So we started planning flights, rooms, maybe a cooking class. And I realized this wasn't just a relationship. It was a second chapter, one neither of us expected, but both of us were finally ready for it. The kind that didn't care about age or assumptions, just connection. And the quiet, steady kind of love that doesn't need permission to exist. In the quiet suburbs of Maple Street, Jake and Sophia's story unfolds like a gentle reminder that love doesn't adhere to timelines, ejaku, or societal expectations. It's a force that blooms in the most unexpected gardens. At 32, Jake, a carpenter healing from a faded romance, finds solace in the simple presence of his silver-haired neighbor, Sophia, a widow in her 60s whose warmth and wisdom slowly mend his guarded heart. Their connection begins with banana bread and iced tea, evolving into shared silences, lingering glances, and profound confessions under midnight knocks. Despite the age gap, whispers from neighbors, and even Sophia's daughter's disapproval, they choose each other, proving that true love isn't about fitting into neat boxes, but about embracing vulnerability and second chances. This tale tugs at the heartstrings, evoking a deep emotional resonance. It shows us that loneliness can be a quiet companion until someone listens without judgment, making the ordinary extraordinary. We learn that grief doesn't define us forever. Instead, it can pave the way for new beginnings if we dare to open our doors. In a world obsessed with youth and perfection, Jake and Sophia teach us the value of authenticity, loving someone for their steady presence, their stories etched in laughter lines, and their ability to make stillness feel alive. It's a poignant lesson that happiness often hides in the familiar, waiting for us to notice it beyond fears and prejudices. Their journey from hesitant neighbors to devoted partners inspires us to pursue connections that feel right no matter the obstacles, reminding us that life's most beautiful chapters are written when we follow our hearts, not the crowd. If this emotional story of love defying odds has moved you, share your own experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found unexpected love in your life? Don't forget to hit that like button if it resonated and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt narratives that explore the depths of human connection. Your support keeps these stories coming. Let's build a community of hope.